As you think about the functions of government and all the things that it undertakes, where do you rank justice on that list?
I think I rank it, obviously, I'm biased, but I rank it number one. I think in order for our society to function, people have to feel as if their rights are being considered, that they're being treated fairly. And I think that's all encompassed in that concept of justice.
I don't know if judges have an annual judge convention or if there's a big group chat or if you guys all talk, but what is your understanding of the unique qualities of St. Clair County as they might compare to other counties around Illinois?
I think right now here in St. Clair County, we have a really quality bench. We have a super group of people, my colleagues. Probably one of the proudest parts of what I consider an accomplishment as a chief judge is just how we filled the ranks here with really solid legal minds and people who have a solid work ethic. I don't know that you can compare those things across the state. I don't know that it's fair to do that.
As for the types of cases that you might see, though?
Well, because we're in the metropolitan community and because at one time East St. Louis and St. Clair County were the economic engine and manufacturing leaders in the southern part of the state, we see a significant amount of civil litigation. We have, obviously, given the demographics in our community, we have a substantial amount of criminal activity. And so we have a very wide, broad, what we see on a daily basis, what we encompass on a daily basis is a pretty broad, varied legal manners.
I think you were telling me yesterday that you've been doing this for some time now.
I've been a judge for 20 years, and I was just telling one of the people downstairs, I've been in this building in one way, shape, or form for 40. I started as a law clerk here in the building in 1983.
Have you ever seen a transformation as, to quote the public defender, revolutionary as the one coming on Monday?
I have not. In my legal career, this is probably the largest transformation that I've seen in any of the legal categories that I've experienced. This is a monumental transformation of the criminal justice system as I've known it. As I said, I've been in or around it 40 years now, and this is the largest, most significant transformation in my career.
Every time I walk into a courtroom, as a reporter, it's always a wake-up call. Just the minutia, all the little things that have to go into effect for the wheels of justice to keep turning. And it strikes me that most Americans just trust that to work. You don't think about it every day. You go about your daily 9 to 5, and if one day you have to go into a courtroom, you just hope that it's still, the trains are running on time and everything's working as it should. Do you think the average person at home has an appreciation or understanding as to what kind of work went into reconfiguring all of that to prepare for Monday?
Probably not.
What does that look like?
That looks like, logistically, as I said, this is a major transformation of the criminal justice system. So I've had to dedicate a courtroom to the pretrial procedures. I've had to dedicate a judge to just that courtroom. We've had to redo all of the forms that you would use for operations. We've had to schedule, we'll have a morning and an afternoon schedule for these pretrial hearings. We have to schedule the defendants that are in the county jail presently. All of them will have a right to a pretrial hearing in the next 90 days. We've had to adjust the schedules of the judges so that the state's attorneys and the public defenders aren't scrambling around, so that we can accommodate their schedules. We've had meetings involving the logistics of this that take into account the judges, the state's attorney, the public defender, the sheriff's transport detail, the probation office, the circuit clerk's office, the Office of State Pretrial Services, the Public Building Commission, in terms of having the location and the courtrooms ready to go, and the judges' chambers. It has been it's been a lot of work. It's been interesting, but it's been a lot of work, and there are so many moving parts. It's very difficult to describe that to the public. I don't want to bore them. All I can say is there have been a lot of good people working really hard so that we can implement this starting Monday.
Are you confident that St. Clair County can handle the changes that are coming Monday?
I am.
That's good to hear. And you mentioned some of those logistical and scheduling changes. Maybe we can get a look at some of those forms later and just see what they look like. Again, it might bore the people at home, but just to show that there are things changing. One of the things that stood out to me was the risk assessment tool. I've heard this described in legislative debate. I've read about it in news articles, but I don't know what it looks like. And I heard even just yesterday that it might still be in progress.
It is in progress.
How can you make a ruling with any degree of confidence on Monday that you know whether or not this defendant might pose a risk to the community?
We have, obviously, for all these years, we have made those risk assessments without that particular document. That document's going to give us a little more insight, perhaps. It may give us what they call an evidence-based reason for doing that. But we've been making that assessment all throughout the time that I've been a lawyer. So the judges have looked at people's criminal histories, their background, their ties to the community. All of those elements that we've been utilizing for years, we'll continue to utilize in this pretrial detention setting. And as they develop the form, will also add that to those dimensions that we already consider.
Do judges feel the pressure knowing that extra scrutiny might fall on their shoulders making that decision to let someone go home or to lock them up until trial?
I think they always feel that there's always that push and pull that exists. Obviously to make that determination to incarcerate someone is a difficult one. And then you also have to balance that with the idea that if I let that person go, have I put somebody who's dangerous to the community or to a specific person or a specific place back on the street? That conundrum, that balancing act takes place and always has taken place. No more, no less today because of the change in the law.
But you do have fewer choices. Under the old system, there was door number 3, where you could say, okay, we're going to put the price tag on your head, and if they could afford to buy their way out, well, that's sort of up to them. Now that decision falls squarely on the judge's shoulders.
As I think I've discussed at various times with people, the academics, and I haven't drilled into this yet, the academics tell us that bond, putting a cash bond on someone doesn't predict whether someone's going to offend while they're out on bond, nor does it predict who's going to show up in court. And as I believe I talked to you about this, the whole idea of bond is just that you show up for court. We're not punishing you before you've been convicted. We want you to show up to answer to whatever charges there are. So it's not pretrial punishment, and I think that's the misconception that exists out there in the general public's mind. If someone's convicted of whatever offense that they've been charged with, we'll ultimately have to deal with that in terms of what's the appropriate punishment for that.
How will you know 3 months, 6 months, a year from now if this is working?
Well, I think we're going to have to make a continual assessment, and obviously there are people involved in the state judiciary. There are people involved in the access for justice activities who are going to be analyzing that data, we'll also get a feel for that here on the ground. You know, we'll know in a relative, as you say, 1, 2, perhaps 3 months, are people appearing in court? You know, are they showing back up? Are we seeing any activity beyond what we had seen before in terms of criminal activity? What's the feedback from the police officers on the street in terms of these folks when they've been let out? I mean, we're going to have information, and we'll just have to, even here locally, we'll have to analyze how that impacts our decision making.
Without asking you to wade into a political opinion or speak to the specifics of any one case, from your vantage point on the bench these many years, have you ever seen a case where someone posted bond and went out to reoffend?
Sure.
How often would that happen?
You know, I couldn't give you a percentage on that. It's not a high percentage, but it has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've had it. I've seen it in both contexts. I've seen it in the context where somebody posted a bond, or perhaps someone posted the bond on their behalf, and they reoffended. And we've also seen it where we've recognized people, or recognizance bond, where they've reoffended in some way, shape, or form. There's a percentage of those folks that exist. And
I think that for whatever reason, in political debate, we like to think about things in binary black and white, okay, this or that. And there's been this sort of red line the legislature drew between nonviolent offenses, even some felonies, and then those forcible ones. But the law is gray, right? Or some of these decisions fall into some gray area. I don't know that it's true that everybody who's accused of a forcible felony will be locked up until trial. They still have a petition, they have a hearing where they can ask to be let out.
That's right.
What kind of things in those forcible felony charges will a judge be assessing to say, all right, we're going to let you go home and come back when your trial is scheduled?
You know, obviously the judge is going to be looking at the nature of that offense. What's the nature of the evidence that's being, that's being disseminated through discovery? What's the person's criminal history and background? Is this someone who's been involved in that kind of activity before? What kind of job does this person have? What's the person's family involvement? What's their ties to the community? All of those things are going to be taken into consideration in terms of whether you let somebody out. And they are now. For the most part, if somebody's dangerous, we're detaining them, and I don't think I'm sure that's not going to change. If we find someone to be dangerous to themselves or to the community at large, they'll be detained.
Mm-hmm. What do you want the conversation to look like? Or are you comfortable with the level of scrutiny that might come in the next few months around something like this?
I am.
Yeah.
This is change. I'm getting older myself. I don't really like change. I've seen processes here that seem to have worked over the years that I don't really want to have to change, and I've spent a lot of time to make sure that we can enact the law. But I also have to recognize that there are inequities that have existed over a period of years. I think you used the terminology, somebody can buy their way out of jail, whereas somebody who's on a lesser income level or wealth, however you want to state that, can't. On perhaps offenses that we as a society do we really want to bear the cost of all of that, both to the individual and to us? And so that analysis has taken place. We're on the front lines of this now. We're on the cutting edge. I think that there's a lot of positive that can come out of tweaking and changing a system that perhaps we recognize has some iniquities in, so that we're always reaching for that brass ring, for that word that you used at the beginning of this, justice. How are we fulfilling our obligations to the citizens in our community, but at large, that are kind of enshrined in the constitutional rights that we really that we treasure as citizens of the United States. So I'm a little. It's been a daunting task, but I'm kind of excited to see what actually takes place, and I think that it's going to be a lot more positive than people might suspect at this particular point in time. And there are going to be parts of this that we're going to have to figure out and perhaps change and tweak as we go also to make sure that this functions in the manner that we intended. Or the legislature intended. I'm following their lead here.
Sure, and the Supreme Court and the administrative offices of the courts have been very involved in some of the crafting of these rules and changes and things. I'm a little reluctant to ask a judge about politics, but judges are, by their nature, political creatures, no?
I don't think so.
Elected?
I think we have to be elected, so that puts us in that realm to a degree, but I don't think, the great majority of judges, once they're elected, really even consider the politics of any of the situations. We're not faced with that. I'm sitting in a courtroom. I'm listening to the facts. I'm making sure that the appropriate law is being applied, and then I'm letting 12 people who are jurors of that particular person who's before the courts, their peers, and they make a decision. So the idea that it's political in my day-to-day operations, I don't think that there's any validity or truth to that.
Legislative careers started and ended based on this decision over the abolition of cash bail. We saw politicians lose their jobs. We saw other ones gain theirs, all because of this issue. And so is that thought nowhere in the back of a judge's mind as they're making a decision?
I have to be honest with you, until you just brought that to me, I hadn't thought about that at all, that this is going to impact my legal career, my judicial career, or my decision making. Hasn't factored into it at all to date.
There's been a lot of pearl clutching and hand wringing in the national political space over do we still have trust in our legal institutions and judicial, and whether or not there's been some political careening into the sobriety of justice, if you will. Have you seen any of that pressure or skepticism?
I have not here on a local basis. And as I said, I'm dealing with people who actually come into the courtroom. I do a major civil jury trial call, so I have jurors in my courtroom all the time. Actually, their involvement and their ability to show up here in court and to see how things operate, I think gives them a confidence as the system works.
And then one other thing that stuck out to me from our conversation yesterday, you explained why you felt there could be significant public interest in hearing from the chief judge in a moment like this. You didn't have to say yes to this interview. Why did you?
Because I think that as we're giving information about this particular matter, I'm on the front lines. I'm in the trenches. I have a pretty good idea of how all this is going to work. I've been involved in the activities to make sure that the logistics of this operation work. I've been involved in making sure that we fulfill both our obligations to our community and our obligations to the spirit of this law. And I'm not overly overjoyed about having to do an interview also. It's not really in my job description per se. But I think it's important for me as someone who does have that information, who is educated on the matter, who has certain knowledge about the courtrooms, who has a long history in this courthouse in terms of how we operate, that I have a narrative that ought to be heard along with the people that are hand-wringing and believing that the sky is falling. So I think it's important for me to take the time and give you the courtesy of that interview.
And I appreciate it. I hope our audience does too. My last question is just, do you, maybe it's too early to say or to assess, but do you feel that all the kinks in the hose are worked out, or are there things still the legislature has yet to figure out?
You know, that's a hard thing to assess at this particular point, but my experience has been that any time that you undertake a change of this magnitude, that there are going to be matters that are going to come up that we're going to have to address. So, you know, I'd like to think all the kinks are out of the hoses, but my experience tells me that we might have to do a little bit of straightening as time goes.
All right.